And now we are recording. So once more, hello everyone. I am Amalia, and welcome to the Laurel and Apprentice Roundtable. I want to start off by just showing our bullying and harassment policy slide. So just give me one moment while I get that up for you all. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Fantastic. All right. So this is the SCA harassment and bullying policy. The SCA prohibits harassment and bullying of all individuals and groups. Participants engaging in this behavior are subject to appropriate sanctions. And if you are subjected to harassment, bullying, or retaliation, or if you become aware of anyone being harassed or bullied, contact the Seneschal, president of the SCA, or your kingdom's board. All right. And now for our regularly scheduled program. So welcome to the Laurel and Apprentice Roundtable. I am so thrilled that you are here. In just a minute, I will introduce our Laurels and Apprentices, but just a quick word about the structure. So I asked people to submit questions in advance of this roundtable. So we'll spend the first 45 to 60 minutes going through those questions, which I will post in the chat as we go through, just so that people can keep track of what's going on. And then after we're done going through those kind of interview style, we will open up the floor to anyone else who has questions. And if, as we're talking, questions pop up, you can put them, type them in the chat. So I will ask that everyone puts your microphones on mute while the panelists are chatting, just to make sure that there's no background noise interruptions by accidents. Okay, so now let us introduce our panelists. So I am Amalia von Hohenzie, and I live in the barony of Stonemarch. I am the apprentice to Elena Hylton, and my main A&S focus is embroidery. So Elena, would you like to introduce yourself?
Certainly. Hello, everyone. I'm Mistress Elena Hylton. As my lovely apprentice mentioned, she's mine. She's delightful. I've been a Laurel for a couple of years now, and it still feels very new. And I do research in a variety of textiles over a variety of time periods, but a lot of costuming as well. I'm a dabbler.
Awesome. Mistress Margreþa. And you are currently muted, Margreþa.
Not anymore.
Yay! Awesome.
Hi, everybody. My name is Margreþa Fauvelle. I have also been in Laurel for a couple of years. Sometimes it feels brand new. Sometimes it feels like an eternity and a half. My main focus is music, both vocal and instrumental, and also, I mean, both in terms of, repertory, performance techniques, and also context in music. One of my favorite things is talking about context in, like, everything that we do in the SCA, but mainly in music. I live in the Shire of Eisenthal, and I like long walks on the beach with ankle bells. That's about it.
Awesome. Phelippe.
Hi, everybody. I am Phelippe Vigneron, and I am the apprentice to Margreþa la Fauvelle. And my current study is in music as well, in the performance aspect, and some spoken word, bardic, storytelling, acting, in that realm. I have been apprentice now for, is it 2 years? It feels like, no, year, just over a year. This has been a fun journey so far, and I'm excited to be here. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. All right. And Master Tiberius.
Hi, I'm Tiberius Iulius Rufus Primus. I'm in the Shire of Panthervale in northeast Vermont, almost across the wall, but not quite. And my main focus is pottery, specifically Roman pottery. And my current obsession and research nightmare and crafting debacle is the attempt to recreate really accurate, perfect Samian ware, which I have not yet been able to do. So that's me. I tend to, like everyone, dabble a bit, but if I had to name one thing that wakes me up in the middle of the night and forces me to work, that would be clay and pottery and fire and alchemy.
Awesome. And Aurelia.
I'm Aurelia Colleoni Bucaforno. I am Tiberius's apprentice. I've been so for a little over a year. If I had to pick, I guess my focus is scribal with a minor in embroidery and a dabble in lots of other things.
Yeah, so I tried to find Laurel and Apprentice pairs who were very diverse in terms of their disciplines. As you can see, some of them are matched up and some of them are very different, and that's going to be part of what we're discussing today. So the first question that I want to pose to all of you, I'm going to put it in the chat and then I will read it aloud. I sort of grouped my questions into topics. So the first topic is getting started. So how does the apprentice and Laurel relationship begin? And how did your specific relationship begin? Did your Laurel start it? Did the apprentice start it? And what were you looking for in a Laurel or apprentice? And for those who are not yet in that kind of relationship, what should you be looking for?
Do you want to just call on us, or do you want us just to jump in?
I would say jump in as you feel led.
Okay, so that's an interesting question, and I know that it's a mysterious one. I know that from when I was looking to become a squire and such. And in my specific lineage, we tend to not ask prospective dependents, apprentices, proteges, squires to enter into that relationship, as I wouldn't want any perceptions of status or misperceptions of pressure to appear. And so I am very clear in my wiki and among the people that know me that if there's a prospective person that wants to work with me, I'm open to a conversation, and but I'm not going to approach that person and say, hey, we might be great together, because I wouldn't want pressure to become part of that.
I'll just bounce off of that. So when I was looking for a Laurel or a mentor, I felt like I had the art side kind of down. Art is what I do in my mundane life, so I'm not new to any of this. I just realized that might have sounded very full of myself, but that's not what I meant. What I was looking for was someone to kind of like help me navigate the SCA world of art, because there's a lot that goes into it that is kind of like mysterious for those getting started. So I was looking for someone who could help me like see things I didn't see, who could help me kind of navigate those waters, and kind of that would be like a good fit for like how I participate in the SEA. Like in our relationship, like Tiberius encourages his dependents to do a little bit of everything. So I'm a fencer, I do a lot of service, I do arts. If I have to, I sometimes do heavy list. So, and he encourages that. So I was like, this would really work out, because like we both approach the SCA in a similar way. Also because I'm in rural Vermont, there are not a lot of Laurels or peers. And I feel like when I was really new compared to just being like 5 years new, I feel like your initial assumption is that you need to find someone who does the things that you do. And that's not always the case, especially like where we live.
And if I could just add to that, yeah, I think that if we are going to become peers in the society and uphold the society, its standards, its conduct, and its passions, that we have to be able to support a diverse range of things. So I expect the people that work with me to have their thing, whatever it is that thing is, but to also participate in at least a rudimentary participatory level in the other thing. So a martial discipline, whether that be thrown weapons, target archery, combat archery, fencing, something, be familiar with the demands of service and learn humility and structure and organization that way, and then their art form, whatever that might be.
Yeah, I really liked what Aurelia mentioned, because That was very similar for myself when I was not a Laurel. I never became an apprentice because I have horrific commitment issues and was terrified that I would be a bad apprentice. And so it was easier. I felt more comfortable just keeping a student relationship with my Laurel Mistress Vienna. Which again, I've been informed that that was a lot of me issues I should get out of my head more, but I had a lot of fears about would I be a good enough apprentice and all. But for our relationship, most of what I needed was someone who could help me with the SEA social mores. I sometimes struggle with social, and so having someone who I felt comfortable messaging saying, what's the etiquette for peerage gifts? What's the etiquette for this situation? This person did or said this thing, and I don't know, is it polite for me to respond this way versus this way? That was super important for me. I had been doing embroidery and textile work since I was a kid. I work as a researcher at a university, so like that wasn't something I needed. I really needed that social, and she was really perfect relationship for that. Different people have very different needs for what they're looking for, and I think that really when I was looking at some of the questions ahead of time, I'm like, so many of these are, well, I have my answer, but it's so different for every single person and every single relationship dynamic. Because I know other people really need like that one-on-one crafts time, but for me it was, I am horrible at social, dear God, please help.
Yeah, and for me, what I felt very lacking in was the research aspect. And so that was why I approached Elena, because I knew, not only was she an excellent craftsperson, but she was very knowledgeable about researching. She had that background as an academic. And so that's why I honed in on her. I'm kind of Laurel stalking is kind of one of my hobbies. And so I was the one who approached her.
I would like to jump into this point and share a very funny story. I don't take apprentices before I take students, first and foremost, because there has to be some sort of, exploratory period to see if the fit is good, not just in terms of whether, what I peddle is what you're looking to buy, but also as to whether, how I do SCA jives with how you do SCA, and what do you need from a Laurel, what do you need from a teacher? And to me, it's always good to have, a little bit of a buffer period to get to know each other. Now, the funny thing is that I decided I wanted to have Phelippe as my student before I became a Laurel. For a number of reasons. More importantly is because I saw in Phelippe myself when I first started, in that we had a crap ton of mundane knowledge and experience and load in our art, but we really, really could very much benefit from having a little bit of help to put it in the SCA context so that it works for ourselves and that it works for others and that it works for the society as well. So a couple of years ago at Coronation, I believe, I wasn't even Laurel, and I asked Phelippe, would you like to be my student? Just like that, because it felt right at the time. And 2 hours later, I got my Laurel rate. Because that's how I roll, apparently. So that was cool in that it really, kind of shortened the timeline from Phelippe being able to be my student to when I could feel comfortable asking him to be an apprentice, because I would be damn Laurel, so I could do that. So what I did, I basically waited for almost more than a year since my Laureling, and when I became Bardic Champ, I decided that Phelippe and I were really a good match, both in expectation structure and how we, our outlook, both in our art and in the SCA. And what we have is a yearly contract that we renew. And that's also something that I was bent on doing, because life changes, we change, everything around us. I mean, look at us, we're in a Zoom meeting doing SCA. There is no telling that this that is happening now, along with everything else, will not change us and change our needs and change our wants and change our paths. Another thing that I would like to add to that is that if I decide to have an apprentice, I understand them that they are interested, open, I should say, to the journey of the peerage. And that on top of everything, I would teach them as a musician or as a researcher or as an SCA aide, I would also be able to advocate for them. And that I would also be able to help them navigate their path to peerage, whatever that might mean for them on a personal level. My path is in all probability nobody else's path, because I changed 3 kingdoms. I got an apprentice belt after I received my Monge. I mean, I did everything backwards. Y'all don't have to do everything backwards. And there is really no backwards if you think about it.
One of the things that I remember hearing from a great Pelican friend of mine is that the relationship of that relationship between a Laurel and an apprentice, or that peerage relationship, really should be one of those where you feel comfortable enough to have them on your couch in your home. You know, and that's something that I can say that Margreþa and I share. We definitely have that sort of a relationship. And I think that being able to make that step, to make that commitment, is that for me was really important. And that's something that when I think about my journey from the beginning of the SCA, my very first event is where I met Margreþa. And so, you know, like I'd known her from the beginning, and she was always someone that always popped up at events when I happened to be, and it worked for us. And I think that having that relationship and having that ability, that comfort level and that familiarity was really important for me. And I know that I wouldn't have ever taken a belt if I didn't feel that. So that was a big step for me to be able to say yes.
Yeah, and Margreþa brought up a really important point, that before the apprentice stage, many Laurels will prefer to have a student stage first as sort of a preliminary, you know, making sure the relationship works before you make it official. I have to say, as I was writing up the questions for today, I felt like I was on a dating website talking about relationships so much. But this is it's an important relationship, and you want to make sure that you want to do the troubleshooting before it becomes official when possible. So for example, Elena, she was a new Laurel when I kind of came up to her and said, yes, I want to be your apprentice. And she said, let's do student first. And I didn't know that was a thing. But I am so glad that she suggested that. And we had a formal discussion of, okay, this is what I'm sort of what my expectations are. And, you know, this is what your expectations are, and making sure we were really on the same page. And so it was, you know, we went for almost a year, and I think the student relationship before I became an apprentice. And I am so glad that I felt so sure that the relationship would work before I actually took the belt. And just hopping off of this question, what advice would anyone give to someone who is looking to enter that relationship with a Laurel? You know, someone who's new to the SCA, when should they start looking? What advice would you give?
First of all, if you are new, don't do it. Like, this is not a joke. If you're new, don't do it, because you know nothing, Jon Snow, right there and then. I mean, find your tribe first. Find what really, you know, speaks for you in the SCA. Make it your own thing, and then see if the need for having a tribe and a community and a network is the kind that includes the belt or not the belt. Not everybody is made to be an apprentice, regardless whether they're made to be a peer or not. And I would caution everybody who's just starting in the SCA for at least the first year to not make any affiliation whatsoever, unless, of course, they're like real life relationships that one accounts. Other than that, if you need someone to teach you the craft, obviously find someone who does the same thing that you do. If what you want is a nudge in the right direction, or the aesthetic or the context, or something that you don't have to do the same craft, just find someone that you jive together as a personality and as how you do work. Not the work that you do, but how you do work.
I too would echo the good mistress's words. I counsel. We work with lots of new folks up here in Fauvelle in the Northeast, and we counsel folks to take a year to build friendships, find themselves, find their feet. Don't join households or student relationships for about a year. And that's flexible depending on people, but that's a general custom we try to adhere to.
I'm taking a look at what Amalia mentioned before. So I had witnessed either directly or through the grapevine seen several Laurel and Apprentice relationships crash and burn horribly, sometimes in giant piles of drama. And as I mentioned, I have some social issues, so I'm autistic, and so I'm very list-based. So I went through all of the various relationships that I had seen have issues, and I figured out a bunch of different identifiers. So there are some that it was a social thing where, well, I was thinking, one person was thinking, oh, we're going to hang out all of the time. And the other person was like, no, I'll help you with stuff, but like, we're not going to spend all of our time at events together. And that caused some issues. Others, it was social things where one person's behavior of like, well, I expect you to have certain moral behaviors around if you are going out partying, and etc. Others, it's various but a lot of these various expectations. And so I went down through a list, and I'm like, I'm a very hands-off person. If you need someone to remind you to do things, I will be very bad for you because I'm awful at that. For example, my fiance Droga is Mistress Lissa's apprentice, and I was just listening to them have their regular check-in, and it's great and adorable and perfect for them. And meanwhile, after Amalia and I she became my student at St. Eligius, I don't think we actually discussed anything until Berka, and I mentioned this to Liz, and she's like, is she okay? I'm like, yeah, it's great. She does her thing, I do my thing. Then when she's doing a thing that she needs my help, she reaches out to me, we do it. If I have an idea, I'll reach out to her. But we're much more bouncing back and forth. Whereas for some people, they're really looking for something different. And so having a lot of ideas of how do you see this relationship? What kind of time investment do you see on both ends? Are you looking to join a work group where your Laurel will sign you up for projects and you will do them with her as part of a community, or is that not really your thing? Like, there are so many of those differences that can be perfect for one person and just utterly not a good fit for someone else. Having a lot of different ideas of what does the relationship, what would that mean to you? What are you comfortable agreeing to are all really important. And that's why definitely spending a little time in the SCA, figuring out how you like to spend your time at events, how you like to spend your time between events, it makes it a lot easier to be able to have those types of conversations.
Yeah, and so Elena, what you were just saying leads perfectly into my next set of questions, which is about setting goals, and how much guidance does the Laurel give the apprentice, and what kind of support do they give? Who sets goals, the Laurel or the apprentice? Because this is such an incredibly individual thing. So as Elena was just saying, we're the type of relationship where I drive my own projects, and then I have a bajillion questions that I'll ask Elena. So there will be periods where there's not a lot of communication, and then there'll be periods where it's kind of a snowball of a million questions from me. And so she's not the one initiating the project, but she helps to guide. And when I have questions or if I need help, she's there to answer them.
Well, Phelippe is what I like to call a feral apprentice, like just go forth and do your thing. And I'm here. I will cheerlead you. I will cattle prod you as needed. But at the same time, I want you at all times to have at least a focus, because I need, well, two things. I need him to be grounded to what he does so that he can derive fun of it. Because if he's not having fun, then I'm not doing my job. And secondly, I don't want him to burn out. It is extremely easy to spread yourself very thin, being in art or in service, in martial arts or whatever. And Phelippe does all of those things. And I really appreciate that he does. And I really want to touch to something you just said about being at events and whatnot. I go at events, and sometimes I will see Phelippe for like 5-10 minutes, and the rest of the time he's out of the fencing field, or he is doing something completely different, because that's what he came to do, and I do my own thing. I mean, I will always have time for him, obviously. I would like to name it like I am his on call Laurel, so to speak. Like he can go out and do whatever he needs to do, you know, to make his SCA better for him and his, while at the same time I am here, you know, to undo the knots in his thread as needed. But yeah, I mean, there are times that if I have a great idea about what he should be doing, I will write him an email called homework. And there won't be homework in that email, but there will be, well, here's what I found, and maybe you should try it and see where it takes you. And that's pretty much my MO, because I know he wants to do music with me, but at the same time, I want him to do all those other things while they keep him grounded and happy.
I love that you said that, Margreþa, because I think that going back to the previous question and about setting expectations, and that was something that I really came to you about too. I was like, listen, I need somebody to help keep me focused, keep me on track, because I'm a magpie. Like this week, I'm going to start some card weaving. Last week, I did knitting. You know, next week, I'm going to be doing some music composition. You know, and then the week after that, I'm going to start studying some fabrics and fencing. Like I get really sort of, I find the next new shiny thing, and then I do it for a little bit to learn that I know nothing about what it is, and then I learn about something else, and then so I sort of get caught up that way. So for me, when I was reaching out to Margreþa, and I was like, listen, this is what I need. Music is what I studied in school. It's what I love. It really is my passion, but I'm going to do all this other stuff, but help me, you know, find the thing that's going to work for me. And then we go, and, you know, and that's sort of the way that it works. And it has worked for us, but I think it was really, and I love that you said that about setting expectations, because I didn't realize that was something we did, but we did. And really what drew me to Margreþa was that when she needs to be focused and she needs to meet a deadline, or she's going to set expectations, she's going to let you know. And that is exactly what I want. And that's exactly what I need as, you know, as a student of hers, as her apprentice, and as someone who wants to continue to grow without getting so spread thin that I'm not sort of growing in a capacity that I think is really helpful for me in the moment. So, but I still have fun with it, and she encourages it. So that's great.
Yeah.
So I approach things I did a mundane MFA in poetry, you know, so that's where I really got in touch with understanding, you know, the process of art for me, which is, you know, there's some inspiration, there's some creation, there should be a whole bunch of research and revision, and then there's some sort of performance or production, and then there's more revision. And many people get confused and think that inspiration is sacred and it just happens, and then talent appears and everyone produces gold-like things. And revision can be really challenging, or the research and the iterative process of art, the craft that accompanies the art. And so what I appreciate in the relationship with Aurelia is that she also has that training. And so she came to the SCA understanding that I can produce this thing and it's technically perfect or technically highly advanced, but in the SCA, we also understand iteration, we understand reflection, we understand having a root in the historical and creating historiosity while we create. And so I find with her, I understand the SCA's big picture a bit more than she might at this stage in her SCA journey. And so we have conversations along these lines, like what's that next step look like? What could it be? What projects might be there? So if you've ever read the story of Miles in the Night, you know, I speak from a fighting perspective. I'm the peer that I hope will walk beside you as you go through your journey and help you when you stumble, hand you a tissue if you need it. I sometimes will be that peer that will be behind you with a boot in your posterior when I see a stalled progress. You know, and sometimes I may be way out front beckoning, saying, come on, we're almost there. Drink some water, take a break, let's go. We have work to do. And that's really flexible. So I find in all cases direct communication to be the most advantageous approach. But Aurelia might be able to answer this much better because, of course, I operate thinking I'm wonderful and fine, and that might not be the case on the other side.
Yeah, I think it really just has to do with the two individuals in the relationship and making sure like you communicate what you need from the other person. And if you're not getting that, to tell them that. I know when I've had when I'm really in the art zone, I've asked Tip for homework. And then other times when my life's falling apart, he doesn't be like, oh, where's your art? And I really appreciate that because, you know, we're all human and we all have a life outside the SCA. But when I'm in it, when I'm there, you know, he's very encouraging. He lets me know things that I maybe already know, but I need someone else to tell me. And also kind of pushing me there was a arts event, St. Eligius. He goes, you're going, right? And I was like, wasn't planning on it. He goes, you're going, right? And I'm like, I guess I'm going. And it's like, well, are you displaying? Well, I wasn't planning on it. So are you displaying? Guess I'm displaying. And it was really a great opportunity. And I'm glad I did it. And it really reinforced some of the things that I needed to hear. Yes, I should be traveling more for competitions and putting my art out in different ways than just Scribble Awards or things like that. So it's good to have that person who's you know, you should be doing this. I'm going to tell you should be doing this.
If I can jump back in, I know I already talked, but that actually reminds me because it's actually very different from how I've worked with my dynamic, both when I was a student and now with Amalia. I'm a very hands-off person, and that's how I learn best. I was mostly homeschooled growing up, so give me my space with access to books and access to research, and I will go off and do my thing, and I will come back with a good result, and I will ask questions as needed. But I actually get very uncomfortable if people start pressuring me too much in certain directions. And so one of the things that worked really well for me with Vienna was she, again, was more focused on that social support. So she also was in a slightly different art form than I was mostly doing fiber prep and costuming, whereas her area was embroidery. And so I was not pushed. I was able to figure out and set my own pace, which for me works perfectly. I respond much better to being able to set my own speed, whereas other people definitely are looking for something with more pushing. And so that's why it's so important. And that's why I also know with a bunch of various social issues, am not a pushy person as well. I am on certain things, but not when it comes to students, because I'm well, I don't like anyone telling me what to do, so I won't do that to them. So it was really important for me to check in with Amalia and be to be clear, I am not going to be the person that's hey, you know, you should be doing this. If you ask my opinion, I'll say, okay, well, based on your goals, this is what I would suggest. But if you need someone to poke you, I am not going to be a good fit for you. Which again, fortunately worked out great because we both have this asynchronous thing where we'll get into a thing, chat about it a whole bunch, rapid succession for 2 weeks, and then do our own thing for a month. Perfect for both of us, would not work for various other people.
Yeah,
and that's really where the fit thing comes back in, because again, different people have different needs, and this works different for everybody. I cannot imagine myself telling Phelippe, here's your itinerary, son. Because it wouldn't work for me and it wouldn't work for him. However, well, I mean, up to a few months ago, I would always ask, so what events are you planning to do? And how have you got like your next 3 or next 6 months planning out for you? Because then that tells me where he's looking to be, not necessarily where he wants to be, but where he's looking to be. And from that, I go on, like, if I feel that he's really missing an opportunity to grow, I would bring it to him and I'm like, hey, listen, this is going on. Like, this niche musical event is going on and you should get a slice of that. But other than that, I would be far much hands off in this is what you should be doing, because I know that this wouldn't work for me and absolutely would not work for him.
Yeah, and just to go off of what Elena was saying a second ago, for me it was actually very important to have a Laurel who was a little more, quote, hands off, because I was pregnant when we were first having out those discussions, and so I knew that my life was going to be kind of nuts for a while, and I wasn't, I knew that there would be periods where I wouldn't be able to do work, and so having the pressure of someone saying, okay, what are you doing now, was not going to be helpful to me at that time. And so I really appreciated that she was so very clear about, this is how I'm going to be, this is what it's going to be like. And so I knew what to expect. And that was really, really helpful for me.
Right. If I just add, I'm sorry, do you need to?
Go first. I'll go second.
Thanks. So I think what's important to remember is that our social dynamic, the way we interact with each other, I think is a very carefully curated relationship, right? We have to be, I need people to be clear with me, and I need to be clear about expectations and performance and the things that we're after. And so I find it incumbent upon myself to know Aurelia well, to understand how she works, to understand her goals, her current circumstances, where she expects and wants to be, and what kinds of experiences she wants, and then how can I contribute and help those things and guide. And sometimes it's an overt eyebrow raise with you're displaying, right? I mean, if you're going to display. And if you're going to display, of course, your documentation is going to be amazing, right? And other times it's, so what events are you going to? Okay, so what do you want to do? We have to just be able to communicate clearly to see so she tells me what she needs, and it's my job to try and find that. And if I'm not the person, I have a broad network with which I can reach and help her find those things. So just wanted to add that piece.
So I think something that we haven't really we hinted on, but we haven't really talked about yet, which is kind of answers this question and the last question as well, is there's that peer side to the path of the Laurel. And becoming an apprentice is you're not only entering in a relationship about the art, but also about working on those peer-like qualities that some of us struggle with, and want to make ourselves better. And it's not just an SAA thing. It's we've entrusted ourselves to these people to help us grow. And Master Tiberius is someone that I do respect. I've seen how he's handled lots of different situations, and how he carries himself in the SAA is something that I really respect. And entering into a relationship with him, I hope some of that rubs off. And that's kind of a goal as well. How can our relationship help, even make us both better people? How can we grow, not just on the art side?
Yeah, so Aurelia, that actually goes perfectly into the next set of questions, which are, what are the benefits of this relationship? So I just posted that in the chat. So what are the benefits for the apprentice, or what are the benefits for the Laurel? And is a formal Laurel apprentice relationship necessary, or are there benefits to keeping a less formalized student-teacher relationship as opposed to taking a belt?
Well, I think that there is merit to everything we do that is a collaboration. Obviously, having a student really helps you focus on very specific aspects of the art at hand, while at the same time you don't feel like, oh, I am defining this person right now, or this person is defining me, and this person needs this from me and I cannot give it to them because the relationship is not the one that isn't, if I'm making any sense. I mean, there are certain benefits in being a student, absolutely. There are, of course, benefits in being an apprentice. Obviously, I find it myself very beneficial having an apprentice because I would not enter into such a relationship with someone that I wouldn't also be able to learn from. Like, it has to go two ways. And the same happened when I was apprenticed. Like, I know that there were things that my Laurel would show me and I would be better for it. And there were things that I would absolutely teach my Laurel and she would be better for that as well. It really has to be a two-way type thing. Obviously, the one big thing for the apprentice is, the sense of belonging somewhere, especially, for people who do have, a Laurel family behind them. All those people that belong to this Laurel tree or this Pelican tree or this Night tree and whatnot, they are all pretty much like extended family, and there is an added sense of duty to reach out to this new person as well. Like, for example, I will always look up to my Laurel's apprentices and students as well. I find some modicum of responsibility that I have to them to reach out if reaching out needs to be done. So it's not householdy, but it is, you put yourself in a situation that people can cater to you and people can help you. So that's a humongous benefit. And of course, there is the advocacy when the time comes for recognition of any kind. It also, in my experience anyway, helps, when you enter a project and you know that there is some sort of seal of approval that here is a person who will do this because such and such person trusts them that they will do it. So you're not coming out of the water that, hey, I want to do this entire project and spearhead it. Well, do I know if you can do it? I don't know. I'm going to ask your Laurel. Hey, your kid wants to do such and such. Are they going to put out? Well, yeah. I told them to do that. So go forth and multiply or whatever. So yeah, that's definitely an added benefit that there is someone behind you who will advocate for you in all the things that you set forth out to do.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, please, you go first.
So I noticed the way I got treated after being belted was very different from before. So I have an MFA in painting, and when the SCA, I had no interest in pursuing that here because I was like, I do it in my regular life. I want to try new things. And then after a break from the SCA, I got back into the SCA through painting and becoming a scribe. And when I went to my first scribal meetup, everyone was like, oh, who's your Laurel? Like, I don't have one. And there was this weird, what do you mean you don't have one? And then my first scribal meetup after being belted to Tiberius, it was, who's your Laurel? Oh, it's Tiberius. Oh, okay, we accept you now. So there was this weird thing, because I know it's not everyone, and I'm not saying it's everyone, but there was, and that could be my perception of it, but there was a very interesting, everyone was being introduced by, this is this person's apprentice, this is that person's apprentice, this is that person's apprentice, and everyone nodded and was like, oh yeah, okay. So there's definitely something about SCA culture that it doesn't give you legitimacy, but it gives you a weird kind of sense of belonging when people see you wearing a green belt. And I don't know if that's a benefit or not, but it's definitely worth noting. I don't think that's necessarily important. If you want to do arts, you can do arts. You don't need to be attached to someone. But I definitely think that it's something that does happen in SCA culture.
Yeah, similar as what I was looking to say ties in very well with that. So as I mentioned before, I never took a belt. So I did have a laurel, but I was only a student. I was not an apprentice for a variety of my own personal issues. Very commitment phobic, as I mentioned before, and horrible fear of letting people down. But I definitely saw elements of that in places, but it didn't actually bother me that much, and I didn't run into it all that frequently. So it just wasn't something I felt the need to pursue. But what's interesting now is I'm also, I have only one actual apprentice, but I do hold the in case of peerage and provide some support for a friend of mine where we are not in any sort of formal relationship. She already has her munch. She's working to eventually become worthy to join the Order of the Laurel, but we were longstanding friends. She's not looking for a mentor. She just wants someone who can sort of, let the council know if there was something. For a while, she's like, I'm not, if my name is ever put forward, say that I am on a break and I can't do it right now. As I mentioned, I hold her in case of peerage letter, in case it were to come up. I occasionally offer advice on things. And that's worked great for her. She doesn't have a belt at all, or any formal, she never says, oh, Elena's my laurel, or anything like that, because she likes feeling free to set her own pace and not feeling like she's, going to reflect poorly on anyone if she needs to take more time off. So I think, again, for everything, there are definitely advantages of it, and there are disadvantages. I will say personally, the advantage to taking an apprentice that I was not expecting. I hadn't really thought much about it. It was the thing you did, and Amalia was delightful. And so when she asked, I'm like, well, I can't in good conscience say no, and I'm definitely not going to do better. So, but watching her as she progressed, as she got excited about a thing, and it's her. She's doing the work. It is not necessarily to my credit. I'm pretty sure she would do all of these amazing things and still be kingdom champ, regardless as if I would her laurel or not, because she's a very wonderful self-starter. But I like knowing that I'm able to be a resource for her. There's a serious sense of joy in watching her create something that we had talked about, and feeling that I was able to give some assistance there and help ease that journey is just a really very awesome feeling. And watching your apprentice become a kingdom champ is delightful. I was not expecting it. It was not anything I would ever have held against her if it didn't happen. But that was a pretty cool feeling.
I think that there's a status to being an apprentice that does not exist outside of being an apprentice. So that's an outward sign of an inward commitment, right? It's a statement to everybody. Yes, I am on the path. My intention is to be a peer. I have a formal relationship. If I do something wrong, there's someone to talk to. If I do something right, there's people to talk to. And I see it as there are now expectations, formal expectations that may not have existed before or may have existed before, but it's almost a broadcasting. So when Aurelia walks through an event with her belt on, and she's going to smile because it's a funny story. Yeah, nice job. She is saying to the people at the event, I am here to do specific things. Hold me to a standard that I may not have been held to before, both in conduct, comportment, and performance.
Yeah, and for me, I think that being an apprentice has helped me deal with it's my way of partially dealing with my imposter syndrome, because I feel like I now have permission to to bombard Elena with questions, essentially. I do stalk a lot of laurels and bombard a lot of laurels, but I feel that there's a special permission there. And so for me, that helps me feel freer to create art, feeling like I am safe in that relationship.
And I think that it also, for those that know us tangentially, as an apprentice or squire or protege, that fits us into the social order in some way, or there's some assumptions about how that all works. And so therefore, so I remember when I had a red belt, the first time I went to a fight practice after that, all of a sudden, for some people, my shots were more valid, and I know that's who we are when we're at our weakest, and it's not necessarily a good thing, but we have to recognize that there is some status there. And so some of the shiny rubs both ways, right? So as Aurelia does amazing things, that reflects on me. And sorry, the goats are yelling. They think it's 4 o'clock when it's not. So if you hear them, sorry. And likewise, I've seen a fighter who identifies as female that I work with that's attached to me, and she gets mansplained to until they realize that she's in a formal relationship. Like, oh, okay, that's a little more hands off. So I think that's the other side of this status discussion.
I think one of the big benefits is you always have someone in your corner who's there for you, and sometimes you don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. And they do, so they can kind of guide you in the right direction, and that's really helpful. And I think that comes that's the biggest thing about having that formal relationship is that SCA part of it, that guidance.
Okay, and we have someone attending who wanted to add something quickly. So Dan, do you want to unmute and just add your comment?
Yeah, this is Grim, by the way. Margreþa touched on something that I wanted to add. Acting as a brake pedal for an apprentice who may be going a little bit too far, particularly in a single project, is sometimes a very necessary thing. People can definitely a project can grow. Scope creep is a thing. And so an outside, even if it's outside of your expertise as a Laurel, looking at that project and saying, that's a lot. I don't know I think you want to work down on this. I think you want to refine it to something a little bit more handleable is definitely a part of that relationship. And that's it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Detected.
Okay, so going on to our next set of questions is the question of progress. And we've talked about this some already, but just the question of how does a student know if they're on the Laurel track? We've discussed that a fair amount. How does a student know if they need to change their behavior to progress? And how do you track progress? Do you find that tracking progress is necessary or helpful in your particular journey?
All right. Well, I can be very straightforward. And if I see something that should be taken care of in any way, shape, or form, I will address it. That being said, everybody has a divine right to make mistakes the first time. And as long as one learns from those mistakes and is willing to grow from them, I will be the first to give them whatever tools they need to get back where they might need to be. The biggest problem with peer-like qualities, because let's be serious here, everybody can get really good at what they do, whatever that is. And some of us come into the SCA with mundane experience in our chosen field, which then we apply to the SCA. Speaking for myself and also speaking for Phelippe, we were and are well-rounded musicians and quite adequate in our craft when we joined the SCA. Is it enough? You bet it isn't, and you know it isn't. It's what happens after that and how you apply this craftsmanship to what the society needs. That this is where we need to be there for the apprentices and help them grow within the context of the society. When I joined, I mean, I'm not tooting my horn there, but when I joined, I had a diploma in piano and I had a degree in Renaissance counterpoint. I knew my craft. But the depth of research that I did since I joined the SCA is like off the charts. And both because I wanted to, like, yeah, I want to learn all 450 cantigas de Santa Maria. Who are you to tell me no? But like the knowledge that I have right now of, let's say, the Italian works of the 14th century, because it's just so nuanced and so niched. Only an environment like the SA can cater to it, because I really don't think that anybody would give me a grant to go get a PhD in Trecento. I don't think that would ever going to happen. But going back to how do we measure progress? There are a couple of ways to do that. We can always compare what we see our apprentice doing against the metric of everybody else who has already achieved the accolade. And I would put an asterisk to it, because what we were looking from a Laurel 20 years ago was probably not the same from what we're looking right now, because I mean, there's just so much scholarship about everything we do. There are more findings. The ice has melted and there is stuff we find underneath that we had no idea existed back in the 90s and the early aughts. It's just what it is. Like what I have read on just on the instrument of the sitar, which is, you know, my thing right now, is nuts. Every day that passes, we learn more and more and more and more. So it is absolutely normal that what we expect from a Laurel today in certain disciplines, there are other disciplines that might not fare the same. The bar is being raised, not because we feel like we want to raise the bar, but because there's just so much more out there for us to learn and to derive from. So for me, if someone is serious to attain peerage, especially the Laurel, I want to see context. I want to see that what they do is not just a snapshot, but it latches on 5 other different things within the period, within the geography, within the social class of what it is that they're trying to do and manifest, and that they understand it in the biggest scale of things. And that's what tells me that this person gets it.
I love that too. Because I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, please, you connect with her. I'll go after.
Sure. So I think from the apprentice standpoint, measuring progress can be difficult because we don't have the access to the information, to what's happening behind the scenes, to the conversations that are going on. We haven't, most of the time, we haven't been playing as long either. So we don't know what the expectations are put upon those who already hold the title of Laurel. So we really, for me, I have to depend upon the guidance of my Laurel to help guide me and to give me that same information that Margreþa just said. And I think that's key to understand what it is that the panel of peers is looking for from somebody who's going to wear this title is important. And I can't know that unless she helps me, shows me, tells me, and guides me. I can do the things that I want to do because I love to do them and I'm excited about them. But having that guidance really helps for me to measure that progress. And if I'm getting the correct feedback and I'm getting, you know, I have other people then coming up to me and asking me about this or talking to me about that, then that to me is the only measure of success that I can really gauge on my own. So, you know, that to me is really where, if I'm on that path and that's what I'm looking for, then that is the best way for the Laurel to help give, to help chart progress and for me to know it.
Well, and I think something that is so incredibly important to remember is every single Laurel has a different bar. And so every round of royalty has different levels of responses that they're looking for, and they're the ones that actually get to decide yes or no. We advise, but the royals choose. Additionally, because it's a polling order, how well people know you. Are you active online? Are you active in events? You know, is your art a more memorable one? Are you charismatic? All of these things can dramatically impact how well people remember you. Do you have an online presence that makes it easy for someone who doesn't know you but sees you on a polling order to look at your work? Did anyone remember to write you in? It's possible we all would have said yes to you, but if no one actually remembered to write you in, you're never going to get it. Were we not able to get you scheduled? So we talk about the bar of what it is to be a Laurel, but it's fake. It's very fake, because for everyone it's different, and there are people who 90% of us or more might say, oh yeah, that's definitely a Laurel, but you know, for whatever reason, it hasn't happened yet. And it's really important to keep that in mind, that if you try to just hold out for just the award, there's so many other things that could be going on. A good friend of mine was running at a huge delay for her manche and her silver brooch due to scheduling issues, where things went in and then the scribe had a backlog and then they had to miss a court, and as a result, it was over a year from when they polled successfully on launch to when it was actually given to them. These things happen. So I think it's incredibly important for all artisans to remember, like, hey, you can judge the quality of your work. Are you improving? Are you better than what you were previously? Are you growing your breadth of knowledge? Are you growing your depth of knowledge? Are you improving your understanding of historical context? Are you sharing your information more and in better ways? And those are all really good concrete bars that you can look at yourself. And because I know what I have as my bar for when I'm voting on a poll, but that's going to be different from everyone else. So when I'm working with Amalia, I also have the problem that she has lapped me hard in embroidery, like so hard. I've got nothing. And so I have no idea what that would mean. So for me, I reach out to, you know, when looking to provide new feedback, I'm like, it's gorgeous. It's better than any embroidery I can do. So I reach out to Mistress Amy and, you know, help them connect for, hey, what should I be poking her towards? How could I encourage her to improve? Because I got nothing on that topic. And so it can be really helpful to, you know, even as Laurels, we don't necessarily have all of the answers and might have to connect with other people in that art form. And all I can just say is, you know, just keep comparing where you were in your art. How have you grown? How have you improved? And if you keep that as your focus, you will probably have a much better experience than if you focus on the award levels or grouping people by awards, because that is a dramatically inconsistent level.
I think feedback is so important, and if you're just in a relationship where you're not getting that, I feel like you're at a detriment, because if you're entering into a relationship, you should be wanting to receive feedback, and you should be able to receive it and open to it. And to just touch on one of the previous questions, I think, like, if you do not want feedback on your work or your behavior or anything else, you should not be in a relationship.
Right. Yeah, I would just summarize the comments of some of the people that have already spoken, and saying that when we tend to want to perceive a metric or perceive a rubric or perceive steps on a path, and my own path has been one that's fiercely difficult to identify, you know, and so some people misperceive the award structure as stepping stones on a path, that one must first get this. What do I have to do to get that? What do I have to do to get that next step? And that is the road to frustration in many ways, because so much of that is outside of our control. It's not that the silver level awards are a scroll that looks like X and launch level scrolls look like Y and then peers level scrolls look like Z. That is not the case. The metric is much more an alchemy of personality, visibility, advocacy, patronage, skill, comportment, and reflection. And that's a highly individualized journey. So I would ask, if Aurelia was to come to me and say, how do I know if I'm making progress? I would probably answer with something like, what is progress looking like for you? How are we going to measure progress? And then how will I help you communicate progress and display progress, rather than assuming that progress is an external standard that has no variance.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And it kind of leads into my next and last set of questions, which I'll just put up here. And then after we've finished these, I'll open up the floor to audience participation. So the last section is troubleshooting, which we've already talked about a little bit, but I just wanted to make sure we explicitly ask these questions. Elena had already kind of addressed what if you pick the wrong person, quote, wrong person in the relationship, or what happens if someone moves and you enter into a long distance relationship. How do you know if your Laurel Apprentice relationship is working or not working, and how do you proceed from there?
I have to say, when I first saw this question, my first response was, wow, what a Southern and Central region bias in that question. To assume that we would ever not have a long distance-ish relationship, because in the North here, we are very far apart as it is. And the ability to have someone that's drivable distance for an afternoon hangout is a luxury not often enjoyed by those of us that live where the snow lasts until Panteria. So, you know, I saw this, and, you know, my knight lives in Nova Scotia, and our entire relationship has been built around the times we can spend together, and then how do we navigate those times apart. So it's Penzic, Panteria, Great Northeast War. And so Aurelia lives about an hour from me, and so I have the benefit of seeing her often, but that does not mean that that's necessary to make this thing work. As you can see, we're all in a long distance relationship right now, and we're doing just fine.
Yeah, and another question just came up in the chat, which pertains to this. What do you do if your Laurel doesn't really play anymore? Which is another related question to that.
I'd like to say something about that, and it comes back to what I said earlier about your Laurel tree. Quite often, your Laurel is not the only person that you go back to, but you have an entire network of people that stems from that person to draw whatever it is you need to draw. Now, if you are, if you're really focused on having a personal one-to-one relationship with another person, there is nothing wrong with having another Laurel. There's nothing wrong with that, either via a fostering relationship, or if they're not playing Laurel really has quit the SEA in all way, shape, or form. I would say these things can happen. We're all humans here. If you need this relationship, try and establish it all over again. However, before you do that, I would make certain that you talk with your quitted Laurel and make certain that the communication has been made. Because a whole lot of, you know, relationship issues come from bad communication. If you manage to get the communication solid, even if your person stops playing, you will have an avenue to keep going.
Well, that's one of the things that I actually had on my list when Amalia and I sat down to talk about, might this be a good fit? Some people do a yearly check-in where we commit for a year at a time. For Amalia, that wasn't more the direction. For me, it was focusing on, hey, I know you're looking at both embroidery, which I'm more comfortable with, you know, until she lapped me, but you're also looking at Bardic. I see this relationship as it is my job to help you progress. And if at some point in time, the best way I can help you progress is by stepping back and letting you have a different relationship with someone else, then that's what my duty is, because I have this relationship, you know, to help you. If I'm still trying to hold on to you, that's not helping you. And so we talked about how, hey, if at any point you're feeling like this might not still be a great fit, or you need to reassess, let me know. If you need to connect with a Bardic Laurel because you feel that's the direction where you need more assistance, that is fine with me. Personally, I'm comfortable sharing. You need to work it all out, but that's an option. If you change directions through embroidery out and you wanted to commit solely to a Bardic person, fortunately she didn't do that, but that's fine. Whatever direction you are going in, I want to help you. And if that means I eventually help you to be with someone else, that's perfectly fine. I'm not going to hold that against you. And it was really important for me to make sure that she knew she had the ability to have that conversation with me, that I wouldn't be upset at her, I wouldn't hold it against her. Because I think if you can pre-navigate some of this stuff, it makes it a lot better going into it when everyone knows, okay, here's the page. And maybe that's not your comfort level. Maybe you see this as much more of a long-term monogamous thing. But having those communications up front, I think makes all of this a lot easier, because you're then able to go into these different situations having at least a rough idea of where you both are.
Okay, I think at this point, let's open up the floor. If other folks have questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask them, or type them in the chat if you'd prefer, because we have about 15 minutes left in our allotted time. So yeah, let's keep the conversation going.
So I can speak a little bit to having your Laurel stop playing. Mine didn't stop entirely, but did slow down to only 1 or 2 events a year for a long time, and has since picked things back up. But I had no indication that that might ever happen, and so I was seriously thinking at one point about whether I should end the relationship, at least in a formal sense. Certainly we would remain friends and etc. And he probably would have been very supportive. My Laurel, by the way, is Peregrine the Illuminator. So it was something that I thought very seriously about for a period of time, partly due to, and for a variety of reasons, I chose not to end the relationship. And part of that is, first of all, there is only one other person in the East who does my main thing, which is math history. And the reasons that I selected the Laurel that I did were entirely apart from, do we do the same things? Which only recently did I start to pick up bardic things more than just doing choral singing, which is my main music end of things. He does some of that, and also bardic, but that's the only place where we overlapped, and that's not our primary thing for either of us. So so having the same art was not an issue, and so there were other factors I was looking for, and those he still fit, and I could still get advice from him, even if, and I already was reaching out to other Laurels to do some of the other things for me, like advocacy and things, and interacting relationships currently in the SCA, and I didn't feel the need to break the relationship from a Laurel Apprentice standpoint. But in any also, one of the things that I sort of have as part of my work in the SCA and my Laurel relationship is I'm also developing a Laurel committee, more or less, because for the period of time when my Laurel was not very active. So I started adding Laurels to my Laurel committee as people that I could go to for various aspects of the relationship and talk to. So there's a number of people who are formally on that committee, or that I just haven't asked, but I feel comfortable talking to on that subject. So that's something that I recommend to every student, whether you have who is interested in the arts, whether or not you are an apprentice to someone or not, is to create relationships with multiple Laurels, because that is a good way to expand your horizons in many ways and have multiple people that you can go to.
And that's part of the responsibility of the Laurel as well, to make certain that if your apprentice or your student really needs someone else's help to achieve X, I mean, it's my job to have a short list of people on quasi-speed dial that, hey, Phelippe needs this. I cannot give it to him because it's not my jam. Can you look into this? If you're not the person for it, whom should I be harassing instead? And this way, I mean, obviously you develop relationships and connections that last well after, you know, this initial collaboration or troubleshooting or whatnot has become. But it is indeed the job of the Laurel to create this outward, you know, spokes for the apprentice to be helped when the Laurel themselves cannot do that for whatever reason. I mean, for example, I don't drive highway. I only go to events that people can give me rides. If Phelippe needs to be somewhere with someone there for him, I will make it happen some way or other if I cannot physically be there.
Yeah, I find that, again, where especially if you have slightly different areas even, my focus, while I do textiles and I do some embroidery, my focus is much more on clothing and fiber preparation, like tablet weaving, dyeing and such like that. Not nearly as much embroidery. So when Amalia was asking me questions in preparation for this past year's champs, I looked at a few of the questions and I'm like, honestly, I don't know. Let me check in with my own Laurel, is an embroidery Laurel, you know, Vienna, as well as Mistress Amy. They're both two of the, you know, people that I go to. So I ended up talking to both of them at St. Eligius we had a question about materials, about what the best option would be. And I'm like, this is above what I know, but let me connect with the people who do, and it's incredibly useful. For myself, I stole Lissa hard because she still does. Like, I'll pretend that I'm much more of a, you know, adult now as a peer, but I still, Lissa's my go-to person for proofreading my work and reading it and being like, oh, this is good, or no, your argument really needs to be shored up here, or why is this even in here? Like, I get you thought it was cool, but like, no, you should take this out. And so it's really useful having all of those different relationships of people you can go to for support and for feedback, and peer or not, they are incredibly valuable and useful.
I didn't find the initial conversations to be difficult. Well, okay, that's a quick answer. I think that difficult conversations are the job of the peer and the prospective student to have. And if we can have an open, honest, and clear conversation in the beginning, it sets the tone for the rest of our interactions. So, you know, I'll call it a negotiation almost. I tried to tell Aurelia exactly what I would be looking for and what I would expect. And then she told me what she was looking for, what she expected. And that has set up how we conduct ourselves with each other. But perhaps she can speak of it better. But I saw the question about, was that hard? I didn't find it difficult, but it doesn't mean it was or was not for her.
I think it can be difficult for some people. I think there's a lot of like worry about, will my desires be rejected? Will they come off as silly? Will my potential peer disagree with me? And I'm not saying that's what happened, but I definitely had some of those feelings, and I understand other people who might have those feelings of like, even just asking someone, hey, do you want to be my peer? Like that idea that you could be rejected and not knowing how to work through that process of, why would I be rejected? Like, is this just not a good match? And I think it's really important that you feel comfortable enough with that person so that you can have those really tough conversations. And I mean, we had this conversation 2 years ago at Harper's, and I was definitely anxious. I had butterflies. I was like, I don't know, this could go so many ways. But I think talking about it is important. And as our relationship has progressed, like, we can have those conversations, we can update that negotiation, and my level of comfort has increased so much because we've worked together now for a while, and I can ask more for what I want. And even if it's like, well, maybe that's not what you need, like, we know each other enough that we can have those tough conversations and not worry about those things that initially might be an issue.
I'd also like to add here that when I asked Phelippe before, when the question came out of my mouth, I said, listen, I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to understand that both yes and no are completely acceptable and correct answers. And the other thing that I did, I made sure that my own Laurel was okay with it, because I wasn't a Laurel at the time. But that's besides the point. But it was more of a courtesy. Even if she would say no, I would probably do it anyway. But yeah, I would hate to put either Phelippe or anybody in the position of having to say yes so that I wouldn't feel bad about myself. That's just not fair to anybody. And by me, being the person who offers the studentship and then having, the upper hand of control in the situation, I wouldn't want to take any modicum of consent, either perceived or real, from Phelippe to answer with whatever was in his heart, not what he would expect to make me happy by saying. And that's super important.
Funny enough, I love that you bring up that consent. We actually teach a class with the Ministry of Arts and Sciences called Consent in A&S that we've been teaching the last 2 years, and it really, we need to be teaching it even more. And I'm like, oh, we should do an online version of it as well again, because it's so important and it comes up so often. So many of us are socially awkward, like so many of us, definitely me, but so many of us. And as a result, that can cause a lot of problems when we end up hurting ourselves or sometimes others because of our own social issues. And so one of the things we talk about in the Consent for A&S class is it's never fair to ask a question if you're only willing to have one answer to. So if you're going to ask someone, what do you think about my work? That's not fair if the only answer you will happily respond to, happily accept is, oh, it's wonderful, it's perfect. You're not being fair to them. You need to be more understanding of what you're looking for, and if you need validation, ask for that specifically. You can't blame someone for how they answer an honest question. And so I think that's really important here, where I've seen people view it as mentioned, like, oh, Laurel speed dating, oh, it's like a date. And there's two ways of taking that. One is the good one, which is, hey, are you and I a good fit? Let's talk about what we're looking for. You might be an amazing person, but if you're looking to get married and have kids and I'm looking to be casual and travel the world without them, we can both be wonderful, but we're not a good fit for each other. That's cool. Other people view it more as a like, oh, well, I want to make this person like me, so I'm going to adapt as much as I can. And we can all have a little bit of instinct towards that. And it's so important to remember that that's not going to be good, because if you start changing yourself or your own views, that's just going to make for an unpleasant situation down the road when those differences start becoming out. But I think one of the ways around that is, as Master Tiberius mentioned before, and actually I think a lot of us mentioned before, that's why giving yourself that extra time, it's not necessarily that you need a year to like learn the SCA or just because it's a random period of time. It's more you need time to develop a strong sense of yourself in the SCA of what am I looking for? What are my goals? What kind of interactions do I like? And being comfortable enough, in that to be able to have an idea of what you're looking for and being able to verbalize it. If you're not comfortable, again, I'm horribly socially awkward and super anxious. So I literally brought a notebook and I had written down all of these things. I had all of the questions I wanted to ask, and I had all of my answers to them for what am I looking for, what am I willing to do. I was frankly worried that Amalia would look at me like I was a crazy person, but it worked out great for her too. Again, I love her, she's delightful. I am a very weird duck, but I happen to find a great fit. But there are other people I'm sure who would find me utterly miserable as a Laurel. And so that's why it's so important to, use whatever tricks you need to, whether writing them down or what, to make sure you're being true to you.
So one of the themes I see is, some people talk about peer fear and being worried about just walking up to a peer and talking. Some people don't know how to get that the first conversation started. I know when I'm at events, I'm continuously surrounded by people. We're engaging in things. We're talking all the time. We're always busy, and so the commitment I make here in public, and I just want to say this clearly because I'm a big believer in clear and direct conversation, is that yes, I'm busy at events. Yes, there's people always talking to me, or I'm talking to them, or I'm going somewhere with my armor on or something. If you want to have a conversation with me, just find me and say, excuse me, and talk to me. And if I can't talk to you right then, I'll set a time. I would welcome conversations about you, your artwork, or if you think you want to work with me, that's fine. And if we're not a good match, I will try to help find somebody for you. I was introduced to my knight because Duchess Margreþa said, I know this guy that I didn't know. And she introduced us and we got to know each other. And, often my husband likes to think that he can intercede and help and facilitate meetings because, he's a little less busy than I am sometimes. So I commit to being open to conversation should you would like one and you're not bothering me.
Yeah, I definitely, I'm one of those people who I'm definitely a people pleaser. And so the question about imposter syndrome and wanting to please people very much resonates with me. And one of the big reasons, well, one of many reasons that I approached Elena was that I had both a great respect for her work and felt very comfortable approaching her. And I was not as concerned with, quote, trying to please her. And so if you are thinking of entering into that relationship with someone that you feel very eager to please, maybe explore where that feeling is coming from a little bit, because you want to make sure that this relationship is that you're not gonna feel, pushed in one direction or another, but that this is really gonna work for both of you.
And actually, that reminds me of something, because we had worked together before you became my student. I had been the mistress of the wardrobe for my Laurel Vienna, who at that point was Queen Vienna. And we were working on her coronation clothing, and I put out a call because I wanted it to be a more accessible thing as opposed to only working with people I knew. I put out an open call saying, if you are an artisan who is looking to get started, I will help walk you through some of the simple clothing we need. We also need some more advanced pieces as well. And Amalia reached out to me saying, hi, I would like to volunteer to help. And unlike many people, she did it all on time, and she followed instructions, and it was glorious. And so we'd already had a bit of an interaction. I know for my fiance Daroga, Alyssa had already looked and given him some feedback on his art. I know a lot of people who had that sort of soft relationship. Maybe they were a judge or gave feedback at an A&S competition or at a display, or you had some other, it can be really useful to just do some different activities, do some displays, try some small competitions, and see who you meet through those, because you might find out, oh, this person, they give feedback in a way that just like clicks for me. And that can be a good idea leading you into, oh, this type of feedback works for me. This doesn't. I like this dynamic. And you have more chances to find those relationships when you're going out doing things, meeting more people.
Okay, we have hit the 3:30 mark, and I want to be respectful of people's time. So thank you all so much for those who attended, and thank you to our panelists. I am so incredibly grateful that you made time to come out and chat. I hope everyone found this helpful. And yeah, feel free to continue to chat amongst yourselves in the event page, but we will end the chat here to give everyone a chance to prepare for court. But again, thank you all so much for coming. I found it very helpful, and I hope you did also.
And thank you, Amalia, for putting this all together. It was beautifully done. We really appreciate it.